Well, in fact, this is a big move that has been taken by the Modi government. Now, in order to ensure that foreign companies do not take advantage of the economic slowdown resulting from the global coronavirus pandemic, the central government has revised its foreign direct investment policy. Now, according to the new policy, an entity of a country that shares land border with India or where the beneficial owner of an investment into India is situated in or is a citizen of any such country can invest only under the government route. So any country that shares a land border with India can only invest via the centralized route. Direct investments will not be applicable for them. This list of countries include China. The nations sharing land border with India include Bangladesh, China, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal and Myanmar. The fresh policy states that the government permission will also be needed to transfer the ownership of Indian companies arising out of the FDI investments from neighbouring countries. For more on this, I'm joined by our executive editor, Abhishek Kapoor, and our editor, Niranjan Narayan-Swamy. Let me come to you first, Abhishek, with regards to this big move that has been made by the government. Now, this is something that perhaps the government was contemplating for a while now, because it has been important, at least for this government, to protect or safeguard Indian interests. And that perhaps could be the rationale behind this change in policy.
Well, Shravan, just for the benefit of our viewers, what has happened is because of the lockdown and shutdowns around the world, economic activity has come to a standstill. That has had influence over markets, because of which the shares in terms of their value have come down of big companies, cutting across sectors and cutting across scale. And with the market cap coming down, many companies which have high intrinsic value are available cheap. We have seen how in the case of HDFC Bank, for example, I have to name it because that's one specific example, where the Chinese have bought 1% stake. Now, that is an area of concern. China is doing this around the world where they are buying these companies cheap and getting stakes into those local economies. There was concern expressed in India that, this could happen and the Chinese could really end up taking claim or staking claim over a big part of chunk of economy, taking benefit of this reduction in market cap across sectors and across companies. And that is why this amendment has been brought in by the Commerce Ministry, where earlier the FDI route put some restrictions on companies from Bangladesh and Pakistan. Now those words have been modified to include all land borders essentially aimed at China.
Well, let me also bring in our editor, Niranjan. Niranjan, essentially there are two modes. One is the automatic route, which essentially means there would be no nod that is required from the government. And the other, which is essentially what is happening right now, that you, in order to invest in the country, you will need to go through the government route. You've gone through the revised policy. Break it down for our viewers. What does this essentially mean? And what is the fine print of this revised policy?
Well, Shravan, like Abhishek was mentioning, it was essential, and I think there was a large, overwhelming, political view also that you have to stem China and Chinese foreign direct investment into India. Now, why is this important? And let's look at the global context, like Abhishek was also saying. Across the world, in European Union, in America, countries like Australia have also taken measures to ensure that at a time like this, when stocks are down, when companies are most vulnerable, there's no hostile Chinese takeover. And Abhishek mentioned one such company, of course, one such news story which has been doing the rounds, and that of the 1% investment, Chinese investment in HDFC, widely circulated on social media, widely debated. And why is this important? It's important because the share price has gone down. Now, 1% itself is not a large number, but they brought it up to 1%. And we know how vulnerable the Indian banking sector is. And now, after this new rule, I think the message that the government is sending out is Indian interests first, Indian companies first, Indian investments first. And I think, they haven't stopped Chinese funding foreign direct investment at all. What they've done is they've put a barrier, they've put a checkpost to ensure that there are no hostile takeovers, there are no hostile purchases that compromise Indian interests. Now, the reason why this is happening, let me give you some numbers to give you an idea about how aggressive China has been as far as investments in India are concerned. China has invested up to $4 billion in greenfield investments in startups in India alone. Now there is another statistic that you need to know. Out of the 30 unicorns in India, Chinese investment is in 19 of the 19 of the 30 unicorns, startups, unicorns in India. So China plays a big role. So you can't let China, take over, take advantage of India's vulnerability and get into a hostile zone where they're trying to take over Indian companies. That's wrong. That can't happen. And there was an overwhelming view, I think political view also, that Indian government should step in. This was in the works, and Abhishek also knows that this is in the works, and this has happened now. Now, essentially, all countries sharing a land border with India, including Pakistan, China, Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh. Now, all of these countries, essentially, before this kicked in, this rule was applicable to 2 countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Now, after this amendment, all countries sharing a land border in India, the FDI will have to go through the government's approval.